First of all, if you're thinking about an entrepreneurship system, what you're really looking at is three main elements. There are the people, there's the capital, there's the flow of knowledge and ideas. Of course, you depend on an infrastructure too. But the point is that you have to have different kinds of people and different kinds of things depending on the stage of company you're at. Of course, at the beginning stage, you need entrepreneurs. But as the company grows, you need access to talent, both on the technical side and on the business side. And the same thing, you need different kinds of funding at different stages. You need market access. So anyway, looking at this, I have a couple of slides from a bigger presentation that I did recently. First of all, this is how venture capital has grown over the last 5 years in the US and in Asia and in Europe. You notice that there is about a doubling of the number of deals in Asia, but the amount of money invested in Asia has just spiked incredibly. It's turned up incredibly in the last couple of years. About 80 to 85% of this money is China. So in China last year, about $70 billion of venture capital was invested. In Japan, which I'm kind of looking at both China and Japan. In Japan, the amount was about $2.5 billion, which is still low, but it's actually a noticeable upswing in Japan as well. So if the number of deals is doubled, but the amount of money is up 5 times, you're looking at the growth of the mega deal. And in Q4 of 2017, there were these 6 or so incidences of billion-dollar-plus venture capital deals. And notice that 3 of them are in China. So sure enough, you're seeing a lot of money flowing at late stage. You're seeing large exits happening in China now. The real kind of a lot of the money is flowing in at late stages now, even more than at earlier stages, so that by this point, the exit patterns in China are starting to look more like the exit patterns in Silicon Valley. Up until recently, they've looked a lot smaller, and there's been more like kind of publicly owned family companies that result. But this is changing. So if you look at people, this is the US as a benchmark. And the gray line at the bottom is the number of working age people who are actively engaged in early stage entrepreneurship. This is the so-called T rate. This is a result of a survey of about 190,000 people worldwide that happens in over 50 different economies. And so if you look at the US, you see a relatively stable rate of people involved in entrepreneurship, either that are actively engaged, or the black line are people who plan to start a company within the next 3 years. Then you have these things about attitude, and the distinctive things about the United States. First of all, we're a very confident country. More than 50% of the people surveyed say that they have the ability to start a company, the capacity to start a company. About 33% of the people are afraid of starting a company because, they don't start a company because they're afraid of doing so. And the blue line, which is really the noticeable change, is the percentage of working age adults who are not entrepreneurs who see good opportunities for entrepreneurs. So that is what's really happened over the last 15 years in the US, is suddenly entrepreneurship has become a socially acceptable career path. If you look at China, you see a lot messier pattern. Now, the gap years are years in which they were not able to get at least 2,000 people in their survey, so they didn't report at all. But when you see a large amount of up and down like that, you're looking at an economy in drastic change. There was a big bump in the year 2010, 2011, and that had to do with the government in China saying that entrepreneurship is a national priority and starting to promote this mass entrepreneurship. But if you look at it, the fear of failure is higher than the US, about 41% in the year 2017. And there is not a sense of growth in the perceived opportunities for entrepreneurs. That's kind of distinctive. While that's been growing in the US, it's actually not growing in China. And you see in the last 5 years, a fall off in the rate of the percentage of people who are actively involved in early stage entrepreneurship. What is going on is a structural change in the Chinese economy. The presence of these new global companies like Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent, they're draining people away from the startup company sector. So that's happening now. The other country that I'm looking at is Japan, and they've had a very low percentage of the population involved in entrepreneurship for a long time. They've got a high fear of failure rate, but it's relatively stable situation. So it looks unfriendly to entrepreneurs. But those of us who watch Japan see some really interesting changes. We're seeing more companies that are getting beyond the struggling small stage and really moving up into kind of major global players. Preferred Networks, which is an artificial intelligence company from Japan, is very interesting. Another company is Spiber, which produces artificial spider silk. And they have really started to shake up world markets. They have a good partnership with North Face. Anyway, that's the situation. Just some final points. If you look at knowledge flow, every government in the world is pushing on innovation. And so the governments in Asia across have lots of programs to encourage commercialization of research. But yes, Asia-Pacific typically lacks mentors. This was mentioned by Mr. Kumar. It's the same in China and in Japan, especially business mentors. You don't have people who have entrepreneurial experience who can really help. This is still a new system. And it's hard to get great workers. The exit patterns are still not the same as they are in the US. Founders are still keeping a larger share of stock. And exit by merger and acquisition is not as well established as a successful outcome. If you're bought by one of the big Japanese companies, are they really going to make your idea reach the world better than you would if you stayed independent? Now, closing comments, why would a startup company here consider China? Why would they consider Japan? Of course, the China market looks huge. It's actually a very difficult market to get into, and there are lots of good networking groups here that will help you make connections with local partners. If you look at what's going on with Uber in China, which they have been basically taken out by Didi Chuxing, and in Southeast Asia, they're losing out to the influence of Didi Chuxing. So you have to think global if you're a startup company here. And looking at China is something you kind of have to do. The reason most people look at Japan is really partnerships with the large Japanese companies that have a particular need for your product and could deliver some sort of distribution. So I think that we also have good kind of organizations, good kind of networking opportunities for groups related to Japan as well. My own center at Stanford puts on public programs every week in spring about entrepreneurship in Asia. We're doing a panel discussion of Southeast Asia on this coming Tuesday. If you look at our website, asia.stanford.edu, you can see these. They're free, they're open to the public. We are happy to help with this kind of Asia-wide networking. So that's what I wanted to say today. Thanks, everybody.